अस्सलामुअलैकुम वैद भाई, क्या हाल है?
जी वालेकुम अस्सलाम। सर कैसे हैं आप? ठीक हैं?
आई एम गुड, ऑल
Hassan
गुड
साहब, how are
सर।
you? Thank you so much for joining us all the way from USA, Hassan. Yeah, it's
Many
always
thanks.
a pleasure meeting you.
Of course, Abed. Very nice to meet you, and very nice to meet everyone here as well. Looking forward to hearing more.
Yes, I think we'll be starting on time at 3 p.m. and I think given some suggestions coming from all of the panelists, so we'll try to wrap up the discussions as well as key findings, hopefully within an hour. Yeah. So, yeah.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
Thank you. Ji, again, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today at this webinar on export competitiveness of Pakistan, case for energy pricing. So my name is Ubed, and I'll be moderating the session today. I think just before we head towards the panel discussion, let me just set some up very brief housekeeping rules over here. If I may just please request our speakers to keep their microphones off when they're not speaking, just to ensure good audio quality for everyone. And speakers are encouraged to switch on the cameras, especially when they're not speaking, as long as the networks allows them to do so. And just to add one thing, this is a webinar and sort of a closed door meeting. However, we will be forwarding you all the relevant details, including the recording after the session, along with some key policy recommendations that will be coming out with it. And it will initially be sent to you for your review, after which we'll be disseminating it to all the relevant stakeholders when they're brought in a structured form. And I think we also invite questions from our expert audience and colleagues at the end or as the session goes. And please feel free to write them in the chat box or on the QA box on the right side. I think just before we go to the panel discussion, we'll just give introduction of our expert panel here today. We have been joined by Mr. Zulfikar Ali. Zulfikar Saab is currently serving as the Director Reforms at the Prime Minister's Office, Board of Investment, and he has a diverse experience at Board of Investment extending up to over 15 years, where he has worked in global financial markets, including a wide variety of industrial and industries and other sectors, investment disciplines, relationships with foreign and local investors, and many other diverse sectors around energy trade in Pakistan. And Zulfikar Saab has also been very instrumental in many of the STPI's prior events. So again, welcome to you, Zulfikar Saab. And Zulfikar Saab will be shortly giving our opening remarks as well. Next, we've also been joined by Ms. Afia Malik. Ms. Afia is working as a senior research economist at Pakistan Institute of Development Economics. She also has over 30 years of experience conducting research around energy economics, regulatory economics, critical national issues, including power crisis, secular debt, corporate governance in energy companies, privatization, and also energy structuring and pricing. So yeah, welcome to you, Ms. Afia Malik. Next, we'll also be shortly be joined by Dr. Faisal Jamid. He's currently the head of Department Research at National University of Science and Technology. He's also an economist with a very diverse experience in policy engagements at all the relevant stakeholders. Next, we have all be joined by Mr. Hassan Anwar, who's currently working as a program director at Pakistan Environment Trust. Has also a strong working experience with multinational companies and international development agencies, working in different regions and environments, including Pakistan, USA, Switzerland, UAE, Kenya, and Ukraine as well. So again, thank you, Hassan Saab, so much for joining. And last but not the least, we have also been joined by Ms. Maha Qasim. She's the founder as well as the chief executive officer of 0 Point Partners, and that is where she's actually focusing on enabling the transition to a sustainable economy by addressing the spheres of environment, society, and governance. Ms. Maha also has a very diverse experience. She's also in working as an advisor at Private Financing Advisory Network and has over 15 years of experience in fields of climate change and sustainability, energy, environment, social governance. So once again, on behalf of STPI, I thank every one of you for joining us today around the theme which actually links the export competitiveness of Pakistan with the energy pricing. Now, I think before going forward with the discussion, let me give a very brief overview of an agenda setting of what we're actually trying to discuss here. So I think basically in the backdrop of this existing what we term as the polycrisis, that includes the turmoil that is driven by the regional conflicts, an extended recovery from COVID-19 induced delays and disruptions across the whole value chain of Pakistan. So I think we all might agree that economy of Pakistan has been somewhat under a pressure. I mean, just to give some indicators, the trade deficit of Pakistan has come under strain and has also widened. Just to quote some numbers from just the SBP's State Bank of Pakistan, the trade deficit has actually reached almost 830 million at the month of April 2023. So again, depicting a very substantial increase on year-on-year basis. The external sector has also weakened with the foreign reserve and exchange rate is again, we're even seeing it in these days. It's under a lot of external pressure, and again, the current account deficit is also increasing. Again, even going beyond this, the economic figures definitely they do appear to be challenging. But on the other hand, the ongoing geopolitical conflict has had very immediate consequences on energy supply disruptions across the world. I mean, on one hand, where it has actually imperiled the economic recovery, which Pakistan was having from the COVID-19, this regional turmoil, inflation, and energy and food security, as well as further supply chain pressure, some of the very key challenges which has to be addressed by the all the relevant stakeholders. And again, if we look at the economic impact, that has actually further trickled down, where an average household is spending around 20-30% more of their incomes in energy products as compared to the previous year. So yeah, we have observed a very sharp increase in electricity as well as other commodities of energies. And secondly, the way this has actually impacted Pakistan is that a very substantial share of industrial sector has either scaled back their production or suspended operations due to very high production cost and unfavorable market conditions. So this is majorly impacting Pakistan's export-oriented sector as well. The high prices and power loss is affecting the operation and production, which again, definitely it's halting the manufacturing units, which with increasing prices of their goods in the international market. So now I'll be coming to Zulfikar Sahab. In the background of these discussions, the objectives we do have for this discussion includes that in this economic situation, what incentives the government can actually provide to the exporters from industrial, manufacturing, or the private sector to boost their trades. Are there any practical measures that can actually improve the performance of energy sector, focusing on the export-oriented sectors? And what is more importantly, what is the role government and private sector can play while managing the circular debt issue? So with this, I would go to keynote and opening remarks from Mr. Zulfikar Ali. And sir, along with your interventions around the theme, we would also request if you can shed some light on any key initiatives that are taken by the public sector to address the solution, and what role do you think should be played by the relevant stakeholders? So yeah, with this, over to you, Zulfikar Sahab. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Beth, for a very kind introduction. Let me introduce myself once again, that I am not the Director Policy only, but the Director General for Policy, Reforms and Legal for Prime Minister's Office Board of Investment in Islamabad. I am wearing 3 hats. One is for the policy interventions, which we usually draft for different ministries, for the investors to lure them to invest in Pakistan. We are also working on the investment protection for the investors which are coming to Pakistan by means of bilateral investment treaties and by drafting the investment chapters in the TIEPs, treaties with investment provisions. And as far as the reforms front is concerned, I am leading the Pakistan Regulatory Modernization Initiative, which is a flagship, our own indigenous program for reforms for businesses in Pakistan. With this, a very good afternoon and Assalamu alaikum to all. And it is always a pleasure to be here with you all today. Rather, I must say that it is an honor for me to listen to you and share my thoughts on the export competitiveness of Pakistan, a case study of energy prices. In the struggling days, it is one of those topics which I believe should be widely discussed to resolve the issue. And at the same time, I want to acknowledge the continuous efforts made by Sustainable Policy Development Institute for studying, analyzing, and making recommendations based on the research evidence on the issues that are crippling our economy and, in greater sense, our economy's growth and people's well-being. Indeed, SDPI is doing a commendable job under the able leadership of their management. Well, Ubaid has already highlighted that we have a very small fiscal space to offer any incentives at the moment, but we can do some policy interventions to streamline our exports. Pakistan exports are doing not so good recently, and there are a host of reasons for that. But for the sake of today's discussion and to make it more meaningful, I must confine to energy pricing only. High energy prices can indeed have a significant impact on a country's exports, including Pakistan. Energy costs play a crucial role in determining the overall production costs of industries. When energy prices are high, it becomes more expensive for businesses to operate, reducing their competitiveness in the global market. This can lead to a decline in exports as the higher production costs make Pakistani products less price competitive compared to those from countries with lower energy costs. And in the region, I believe that our energy costs are the highest. Furthermore, high energy prices can also affect the cost of transportation and logistics, which are vital components of export process. Increased fuel costs can raise transportation expenses, making it more expensive to move goods to international markets, further hampering export activities. So these are some common sense things that we all know. Now, how to address these challenges? This is the main topic and main theme of our discussion. So let me discuss some of the policy interventions which we can introduce, and we are recommending these policy measures to all the relevant ministries. And government is trying and striving quite hard to act upon it. So let's discuss one by one. One is the diversifying the energy mix. This is the first recommendation which we usually give to the concerned ministry. Pakistan can focus on expanding its energy infrastructure and diversifying its energy sources. This may involve increasing the share of renewable energy, such as solar and wind power, which can help reduce dependence on imported fossil fuels and stabilize energy prices in the long run. So this is a key policy intervention by which we can reduce our prices. We also need to improve our energy efficiency as well. Encouraging industries to adopt energy efficient technologies and practices can help reduce overall energy consumption and costs. This can be achieved through the implementation of energy audits, providing incentives for energy efficient investments, and raising awareness about energy conservation. So government is trying to propagate all these things to the general masses about the conservation and other energy efficient tools which are available in the market. The third point which I would like to highlight is the to enhance domestic energy production. Pakistan can explore and develop its domestic energy resources such as natural gas, oil and coal to reduce reliance on costly imports. This may involve incentivizing domestic energy exploration and production, improving infrastructure for extraction and distribution, and promoting public-private partnership in the energy sector. This is very important to utilize our own natural resources for the production of electricity in Pakistan. Then the other good policy intervention would be promoting renewable energy investments in Pakistan. The government, which is definitely a BOI, can provide incentives and create a favorable environment for domestic and foreign investments in renewable energy projects. This could involve offering tax breaks, simplifying regulatory processes, and providing financial assistance for renewable energy infrastructure development. So we are planning to give loans to the general public to solarize their homes. So it will definitely reduce the cost of electricity and the availability for the industries. More the availability, the prices would go down. And in the end, I would like to add that strengthening energy diplomacy. Pakistan can explore bilateral and regional energy cooperation agreements with neighboring countries to enhance energy security and access more affordable energy sources. Just like we had a recent event at the Pakistan-Iran border for the electricity transmission lines for the Gwadar. This may involve establishing energy trade partnerships, exploring cross-border energy transmission projects, and participating in regional energy initiatives. So, with all these implementations, I think it is important to note that addressing energy price issues and boosting export requires a comprehensive approach involving multiple stakeholders, like you have already invited many of them, including the government, private sector, and relevant industry associations. Detailed analysis of the energy sector and regular monitoring of energy prices is necessary to develop and implement effective strategies for sustainable economic growth and improved export competitiveness. With these remarks, let me hand over the mic to Ubaid. Thank you very much of all of you to listen me patiently. So I have already given you food for thought and to discuss these recommendations in detail. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Zulfikar Sahab. I think you very rightly pointed out, and it's very good to hear the Board of Investment again trying to mobilize the transition towards renewable energy. And definitely, I completely agree with the point that you raised about energy efficiency, because I mean, if we look at the landscape which Pakistan has previously for energy efficiency, that was something that was missing from the landscape for a very long time. But I think just recently, with the introduction of new energy efficiency and conservation policy by National Energy Efficiency and Conservation Authority, and they're coming up with an action plan. And also these interventions are also highlighted in Pakistan's recent climate commitments, such as nationally determined contributions. So yeah, I think completely agree with most of all of the points, in fact, that you mentioned, that they're very critical to enable the transition towards low energy pricing. And definitely, it's good to hear the Board of Investment planning to give out loans to these projects. So yeah, I think this set up a very good pitch to go ahead further with the discussion. Now, again, taking this debate more to coming towards the panel, I think we'll initially start with Ms. Afia. Ms. Afia, you have been working a lot around the energy economics and circular debt issues of Pakistan. So, I mean, in your perspective, how does the problem of circular debt challenge the growth of the industrial and manufacturing sector? And also, if I could just request your views, like what hurdles and barriers are being faced by women-led businesses while participating in these international trades? I mean, how can incentives related to these energy pricing could be a significant energy input, which is actually a very significant energy input, can help them reduce their cost of production and make their products more competitive in the international market? Yeah, with this, over to you, Ms. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ubaid. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay. As you mentioned in the beginning, given the precarious foreign exchange reserves position, along with the enormous debt burden and its repayment pressures at the macro level, the only option Pakistan has is to increase its exports. It is also a fact that changes in energy prices has implications for the competitiveness of economies. And the energy price policies, these policies impede the capacity of the domestic industry to compete in exports market, and predominantly for the energy intensive sectors. Textile and clothing is our major export. And it is the only hope. The exports of textile and clothing exports are the only hope to provide a cushion to the declining foreign exchange reserves. But at the same time, this sector is an energy intensive sector. The cost of doing business has to be manageable in this sector to keep exporters competitive globally. Here I would say it is not gender specific. It is for all export-oriented units, irrespective of who owns it. But yes, the situation becomes more critical for small exporting firms, SMEs, with the increase in energy costs. Textile exports remain almost stagnant between 2014 and 18, as per the APMA reports. And the textile exports trend changed with the industrial support package in the form of regionally competitive electricity tariffs. With this package in the last few years, industry became the second largest recipient of tariff-related subsidy. And it is also a fact that without this package, the sector, along with the sector, I mean the industrial sector, along with the commercial sector and high-end consumers, these are cross-subsidizing the 75 to 80% of the domestic and all agriculture consumers. Thus, this cross-subsidy is in fact compromising its international competitiveness. At PIDE, we have done a lot of research and found that price variation across various sectors creates horizontal injustice to the productive sectors of the economy. There is a weak link between price and demand for some sectors, for example, domestic sector, and substantial cross-subsidization from industry and commercial consumers. And this cross-subsidization has skewed consumption towards less productive domestic consumers over the years. In fact, it has increased inefficient use of energy in these subsidized sectors. And it is one of the reasons behind circular debt. Textile and garment industry exports rely heavily on electricity consumption. And over the years, limited progress has been made in reducing these cross subsidies across sectors. In Pakistan, energy tariffs are generally very high, not only due to the suboptimal energy mix, but also due to governance issues, operational, financial, and commercial inefficiencies, distortions in the applicable tariff schemes. And all these factors are also responsible for rising circular debt. So the policymakers, they try to cover all these inefficiencies through subsidies or by charging a higher tariff to industry, commercial sector, or high-end residential consumers. Given the government fiscal position, providing subsidies is not a viable option. And from the energy sector's point of view, with a circular debt of equal to almost 2.5 trillion, when government can't manage for the subsidy amount, then why should it commit for such a subsidy? From the industry or manufacturing exports point of view, cross-subsidization across sectors is also not viable for competitiveness. And also there is no legal, economic, or technical justification for such an enormous cross-subsidy from industry to other sectors. By other sectors, I mean domestic and agriculture sectors. So the financial burden on the government by removing this cross-subsidy will not be much if estimated in terms of its impact on exports growth. So when we look at industrial tariff globally, the evidence suggests that industrial tariffs are lower than residential consumers in countries which have priority towards industrial growth. So not only, and this is happening not only in developed countries, but also in low and middle income countries. Even in some African countries, they have preference for productive sectors. And the tariff for the productive sectors is low as compared to the residential sector. It is also a fact that Pakistan is among the top 30 countries worldwide with comparatively high electricity tariffs. And why? It is due to the long-term agreements with guaranteed capacity payments to thermal generation companies. So switching to cheaper indigenous resources is at least, it is not possible, at least in the short to medium term. Therefore, what is required is this complex tariff mechanism must be revised to reduce the electricity prices in Pakistan. And electricity tariffs should be based on the actual cost of services to all consumer categories. For achieving the socio-political objectives, the government has other alternatives. No need for providing relief at the cost of compromising the export competitiveness of our industry. And in our research, what we have found is the best way is to move to a flat linear tariff without cross subsidies and consumer differentiation. It will not only minimize inefficiencies, but will have a positive impact on energy sector revenues. By removing cross subsidy, the tariff for export-oriented units will come down. In fact, it will become close to the regionally competitive tariff after removing these cross subsidy. Yes, it will hurt poor households. So instead of subsidy, direct cash transfers to social protection scheme is a better alternative, welfare alternative, which the government can provide to these poor households. Secondly, until or unless our tariff structure in which service costs are not recovered from all consumer categories indiscriminately is not implemented, fiscal challenges for the government will remain. Therefore, all the onus lies on the regulatory authority. NAPRA needs to revisit its tariff calculation policy as per the NAPRA Act, not only for the fairness and export competitiveness, but also for the overall financial improvement in the power sector. Secondly, in the energy sector is bearing the burden of huge capacity payments. So it will not be easy to change our fuel mix in the short term, as I said in the beginning. So due to, and these huge capacity payments are due to long-term contracts. And it is one of the reasons behind rising circular debt. For recovery of capacity payments, the best option available is to increase the sales and consumption. And how to increase this consumption? By reducing prices significantly and making the grid electricity attractive to productive sectors by lowering tariff for them. And who are the productive sectors? It is the industry. And by the way, service provision is cheaper for the industry as compared to the domestic consumers. It is cheaper to provide electricity infrastructure to industry as compared to other sectors. And for from the circular debt point of view, only increasing tariff has always happened. Basically, the government policy is to increase tariffs to resolve circular debt issue. It will not resolve the circular debt issue. The circular debt issue can be resolved by eliminating all subsidies as well as all cross subsidies. Although it is difficult, but that's the only solution. Without doing it, it would be challenging to obtain the fiscal discipline at the sector level, as well as at the national level, and for export competitiveness. And from the firm's perspective, as Zulfikar Saab has also mentioned, they must adopt new and more efficient technologies to reduce energy intensity. The firms can counter the impact of higher energy prices with innovation. Firms must invest in renewable energy sources that are more sustainable and affordable in the long run. The increased use of green energy combined with energy efficiency and conservation would reduce the net energy production costs. Here, government can provide incentives by making a level playing field for renewable technologies at the policy level. The government can facilitate especially small businesses or businesses owned by women by providing easy financing for the solar PVs and for all other regulatory policy reliefs. Now, one final comment. Now, electricity market is opening up for the bulk power consumers of 1 megawatt. So wheeling of power should be made attractive and viable for bulk power consumers, and bulk power consumer is basically industry. And this should be done by NAPRA. The issue of stranded cost needs to be resolved. Those who are managing in the energy sector is the power division, who is managing basically the discos. They consider wheeling of power as a threat to the financial viability of the sector. In Pakistan, this economic consideration is the big threat to the implementation of electricity market and power wheeling. So if the buyer, which is a bulk power consumer or industry, he has to pay for the losses of distribution companies in the form of stranded cost or cross subsidies, what benefit these consumers, I mean these industrial consumers, will have in choosing some other supplier of electricity? So the NAPRA role is important, who has to ensure that only Technical losses are allowed for in calculating wheeling charges and not the commercial losses. And the evidence suggests that the commercial losses are minimal for industry in Pakistan. If this open access regime is implemented in a fairer manner and export-oriented units, industrial units would have their energy costs reduced along with the availability of standard supplies, this will make our exports more competitive. These are a few points from my side. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Ms. Safia, for very candidly initially highlighting very key and pertinent challenges to the textile sector. And I think not even beyond the textile sector, particularly the point of cross-subsidization that completely agree is one of the very key challenges, and key challenges needs to be addressed by Pakistan, especially given the regional turmoil and the challenges we're facing due to these perhaps untargeted subsidies. So I think, and also again, thank you for giving you very concrete and solid recommendations about how do we address this situation through these flat reliefs and what the role has to be played by the definitely the energy relevant ministries and the key stakeholders. Now, I think again, coming towards the sector that you mentioned about the textile, if we look at the growth of the textile over the past year, again, in this whole scenario, it has deteriorated. And as a supplier of energy at a very regionally competitive rate is difficult, leading to reduction in exports to the European countries, which is actually one of the very important critical destinations of the textile industry. So again, coming to you, Hassan Saab, you have been dealing with the textile sector for long through Pakistan Environment Trust. So what are the possible plans of actions to support the textile industry? And again, how do you actually relate this with the work currently being carried out at Pakistan's Environment Trust? Yeah, over to you, Hassan Saab.
Yeah, thank you, Abed, for this invitation to the esteemed panel, and really appreciate some of the comments from Afia and Khalid Saab earlier on, primarily focusing on some of the sort of the work on the energy pricing side. Abed, I just want to sort of reframe your question slightly, because I think as we are looking at competitive pressures, particularly in terms of energy pricing, relative to our regional competitors, I think it's also important to look at to have a forward-looking lens. Primarily because I think this is a dual-edged sword now. The second pressure that's now coming is especially in the EU, is the carbon border adjustment tax mechanism, the CBAM, right? Now, wherein not only are we looking at lower energy prices, but we're also looking at the fact that the production trajectory, especially the energy sector trajectory, has to be decarbonized. So you need to have a lower footprint plan in place, especially. Now, Pakistan, while facing very high energy prices relative to its regional competitors, currently it has actually one of the lowest grid emission factors in the region, especially compared to India and Bangladesh. Having said that, both India and Bangladesh have actually designed or have in place decarbonization pathways, particularly for their energy and electricity sectors, that will allow them to have significantly lower emissions factors by 2030, coupled with more competitive energy pricing. So our textile sector particularly is at threat. Now, the Pakistan Environment Trust and the Net Zero Pakistan Coalition currently represents more than 30% of Pakistan's total exports, which means that all of these threats are very real threats to us, and we are an organization that's actually dealing with identifying pathways to addressing them. And I just want to sort of underline the fact that for the Pakistan Environment Trust, decarbonization is actually underpinned by boosting our export competitiveness. So essentially, decarbonization not at the expense of growth, but actually enhancing the potential and giving that Pakistan that competitive edge. Now, when I look at this problem, I see it from two sides. On the one side, we've got our textile sector, who over the past sort of 2 decades, faced with issues such as grid reliability and the pricing from the grid, actually resorted, particularly some of the larger players in the textile sector, resorted to moving to captive generation. Now, with that came in, some renewable energy generation, because a lot of the textile sector did install captive solar. However, that was limited purely by physical demands. Majority of the captive generation came from gas-fired, carbon-intensive generation purposes. Now, for the companies to be able to become more cost competitive on the energy side, as well as have a lower carbon future, they're faced with only two pathways, right? on the one hand, they need to be able to buy more renewable energy from off-site generators, which can come in the form of CTBCM, or on the other hand, they need a more reliable decarbonized grid. Now, neither of those options are available as of right now. Hopefully, in the next few years, CTBCM might allow that. But as of right now, those two options aren't available to the industry. On the other side, you look at the government, right? And the government right now and the public sector is buried under the weight of circular debt, something that was really explained well by Afia in her dissertation. Now, where is the circular debt coming from? So as someone as working with the textile sector, what we see is that on the one hand, the government is actually subsidizing gas to allow the industries to generate captive power and make, still allow them to be competitive, relevant, relative to their competitors. On the other hand, as Afia also pointed out, the government is also having to pay for capacity payments for a grid that is actually underutilized right now. A lot of the capacity payments that are going for these power plants are actually not being fully utilized, as the industrial sector, particularly the textile sector, is completely reliant or highly reliant on captive generation sources, which are relying on gas-fired power. And consequently, the government cannot, as a result of this sort of circular debt situation, the government does not, or the public sector does not have the resources to actually invest in improving the reliability of the grid infrastructure, particularly the transmission and distribution to the industrial sector. And neither does it have the money to invest in a decarbonization of the grid, right? Invest in new sort of renewable, or as mentioned earlier, indigenous sources, because of these long-term capacity payment contracts, as well as just a lack of capital available right now to the government. So for us, I think, Afi and you guys have already sort of identified much more sort of complex solutions, but what we see is a pathway that's essentially twofold, right? On the one hand, we actually welcome and look forward to the CTBCM being implemented. And I think one way out, particularly for the textile sector, when it comes to energy, is for the CTBCM's actual implementation. Now, we've seen the pilot phase conclude. We would want sort of the CTBCM to actually be implemented as soon as possible in its true letter and spirit, which will allow the industrial sector, especially the exporter sector, to be able to purchase more and more renewable energy from the third-party off-site sources, and reduce their reliance actually on captive gas-fired generation, which will then also allow the government to actually start looking at rolling back subsidies. Because as you consume more and more price competitive renewable energy, your reliance on the textile sector's reliance on sort of gas-fired generation becomes less, and the government can then reduce these subsidies. Now, some of these subsidies can actually be reinvested by the government in improving the transmission and distribution infrastructure, which will help, in enhance grid reliability, as well as free up or actually, allow the capacity payments that are being made to the existing, generation companies to be actually utilized in the grid. The longer term trajectory would then be for the government to be able to then make investments into the, introducing more and more renewable energy as well as indigenous sources of energy, enhancing and reducing the emission factor of the grid. I would just like to stress right at the end, and I think, and I think there are, and allow more for the speakers the time, but I would just like to stress at the end that we need to sort of look at this problem as twofold now. I think it's too late in the day to just focus purely on price competitiveness without and discounting, the carbon footprint of our energy sector, because now both of these factors have been underwent, and especially in a country like Pakistan, where we do have indigenous sources, particularly when it comes to renewable energy. I think these two sort of challenges go hand in hand. So I think the conversation maybe slightly needs to be reframed in not just in the form of price competitiveness, but also its carbon footprint. So I'll hand it over to you, Baz, and I would love to sort of hear the opinions and views of all the other participants. And thank you for inviting us at this esteemed forum.
Thank you so much, Hassan Saab. And I think very relevant points made here on the decarbonization of the industrial sector. Perhaps particularly it makes a lot of sense even for all the sectors, but especially for the textile, when the exports are going to the areas where there is actually demand for the greening of the products. And I think it's just not, it makes much better in economic case, because unless, given the global pressure coming to this sector, unless the textile doesn't, if textile does not make this transition, it's actually going to come up with in its exports in form of decline in its exports. Sorry. Yeah, and I think again, very relevantly, Ms. Afia also raised the same point when she was discussing the power wheeling reforms, the competitive trading bilateral contracts markets. That's actually going to play a very important role, especially to, in reducing the increasing energy prices and all the further issues coming around with due to the lack of evacuation capacity of the grids and constantly increasing energy prices. I think this is where we need to expedite to come up with the wheeling, on the wheeling side, wheeling charges as well. So I think, yes, very pertinent point. Thank you so much, Hassan sir. Now, again, coming to Dr. Faisal, sir, in your perspective, what do you think are currently the further challenges faced by the manufacturing sector due to this energy shortfalls which are occurring? And so you have a lot of expertise in the sector. What are some strategic policy measures you think should be made in place to make the exports more competitive? Yeah, over to you, Dr. Faisal. Thank you so much again for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I think this is a very relevant and pertinent topic for the time that we are facing at the moment. Let's start with basic economics. Economics of production. For example, we have a simple production function where we have at least 4 inputs, including labor and capital, and then we have raw material, and finally energy. So if we talk about the capital, the interest rate is restrictively high. It is above 20%. So we can assume what kind of difficulties industry would have been facing with this high interest rate, and especially textile industry alone account for 40% of the banking credit. So then we have raw materials. Again, exchange rate is too volatile, and sources are depleting so quickly that importing raw material, especially most of the exporting sectors are importing almost 40% of raw materials from international market. So their cost of production is again disadvantaged because of high cost of raw materials, and this is also a monetary phenomena with exchange rate is creating problems. Thirdly, we have labor, and labor cost is also increasing over the years because of minimum wage regulations as well as labor laws. I don't know how vigorously these laws and regulations are implemented, but theoretically we can assume that labor cost is also increasing for the industry. And finally, we have the energy. As far as energy is concerned, electricity sector was highly subsidized, has been highly subsidized for the industry during last few years, and recently the government have removed those subsidies, and that is why the industry is facing problems. But on the whole, if we compare the electricity and gas tariffs in Pakistan for industry vis-a-vis the competitors in like India and Bangladesh, in Pakistan, electricity tariffs are 13 cents per kilowatt hour, which are 7.2 and 7 cents per kilowatt hour in Bangladesh and India. And similarly, gas tariffs are $6.5 per MMBTU in Pakistan, which is around $3 per MMBTU in India and Bangladesh. So, having said that, it is not. It seems not wise to expect more from the government with the fiscal space that they have at the moment. Now come to the second part, which is the export situation in Pakistan. If you see the export situation, the quantum, let's start with the production. Quantum index of manufacturing shows the index has declined from around 140 to around 115, which the data that I have received from the monthly economic update and outlook April 2023. And it also shows a decline in exports from $23.7 billion to $21.1 during the fiscal year 22-23, which records a decline of 11%. And similarly, remittances are also have also declined from $23 billion to $20.5 billion. Imports have declined from $52.7 billion to $41.5 billion, which is 21% decline. And as a result, current account deficit has declined from $13 billion to $3.4 billion, which is 74% less than the corresponding number figure in the last year. It means that the loss in terms of external trade or international trade is not that huge, and also as I have mentioned that when IMF has came into the picture, now expecting more from the government is not that viable. And now lastly, I come to the export sectors. The export sectors in the country are highly restrictive, as other presenters also have mentioned. We have a dichotomy. In the country, we have restricted and protection imposed on the textile sector especially. But as far as international market is concerned, we are facing competition. So this reminds me a historical case of 1990s when our players, our hockey teams, were enjoying hegemony during last 2-3 decades. They were top in the world, but afterwards in 1990s, AstroTurf was introduced. So for international competitions, we have to play on AstroTurf, and inland in country, our players were trained on natural grass, so they cannot perform in international competitions. So first of all, we need to remove the protection domestically, so as to make the muscles of our industry, because the challenges that we are facing, they may dilute, or they may, you can say, change their shape. Because, for example, Bangladesh is providing subsidized natural gas to its industry. It may not be able to provide it after some time, but if their industry is not becoming efficient, they cannot remain on the status on which they are now. So the first thing is to remove protection, both tariff related protections as well as non-tariff barriers, which are more frequent. And actually, I think there is no formal import of textile products in Pakistan. We got something through some smuggling, but actually there is non-tariff barriers on international export. That is why the prices of textile in the country are higher than international market. So when they go for exporting the products, they face competition, and they find themselves helpless to compete with their competitors. Expecting too much subsidies in the form of tax subsidies and export subsidies, and then energy subsidies and many other form of subsidies is not a good option, because because our export sectors are enjoying subsidy for too many years now. They need to at least become competitive so as to reduce their reliance on the subsidies. And lastly, we should also account for the environmental burden that they are producing. It is not only the carbon footprints or carbon emissions. They are posing huge externality cost on the local type of pollutants, which are damaging the groundwater, which are damaging are imposing the health burden on the residents of the area in which they are operating. We have seen the situation of the hubs of textile industry, especially, and also leather industry. Their situation, the situation of the ecosystem is pathetic in those areas. So I think government also need to account for this kind of burdens also into account, and producing huge exportable surpluses at the cost of the local residents is not a good option. And we should diversify our export portfolios and exportable commodities. And I think removing the subsidies. And another thing that Ms. Safi has also mentioned is that it also has something to do with the generation pattern, electricity generation additional capacity pattern also. We had around 20,000 megawatt capacity since last many years, but since 2019 and 20, it has increased to almost 35 to 40,000 megawatt. It is also doubled actually. So it means there is a huge capacity charges payment, and government cannot provide subsidies. Huge subsidies are also involved at the moment because of the capacity charges. And how can they provide subsidies to certain sectors or certain consumers, especially when they are in IMF program also. So I think considering these restrictions, the only option is to improve the efficiency of the production efficiency, and blaming all the time. Actually those blames are those concerns regarding the circular debt and regarding the electricity tariffs are also valid. But I think these are rules of the game, and these in the situation that we are facing, they would be there. But to survive, the industry players need to be more competitive, need to be more efficient. The wastage should be reduced. One of our colleagues, Dr. Zafar, often mentioned that RCA shows that Pakistan is most competitive in producing textile waste. So this is the pathetic truth that we have. So I think we need to improve the efficiency of production so as to become more competitive, and in only this way we can face the competition that we are facing in the international market. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Faisal. I completely, we all understand that in this regional turmoil and again, the fiscal challenge, the government is facing the transition in the energy sector, or the transition towards clean and renewable energy that's has become, we completely agree, that has become difficult. And I think these Pakistan has also been facing a lot of these other economic challenges, which is actually posed an enigma to the energy sector with no win-it-all solution. So definitely addressing the production efficiency and the demand side of things, that's very extremely critical. And I think, thank you so much again for giving up some very key numbers and indicators, particularly around the volatilities, labor cost, and very externality cost. And I so completely agree with the suggestions placed over here. So I think just again linking it with another opinion. So again, Ms. Maha, coming towards you have been engaging with a lot of the private sectors. So yeah, and in your perspective, in this context, perhaps what are the key structural issues being faced by the energy sector, and what role do you see can actually be played to make the sector more sustainable? And again, just coming towards, I think perhaps Dr. Felsel also mentioned that how effective do you think is the role to be played by the production efficiency of the things as well? So yeah, Ms. Maha, over to you.
Thank you so much, Abed. So I think a lot of points have already been covered by the previous speakers, so I will not to kind of repeat myself, but just one of the things I think that we hadn't really talked about was the potential of the EV industry, right? So I think electric vehicles have huge potential in Pakistan. Globally, there is sort of a move towards EVs, not just because of their environmental impact, reduce pollution if your grid is based on renewable energy, but also it can utilize your excess grid capacity and address this problem of unutilized capacity, especially if you're charging at off-peak hours. In Pakistan, I think we're already, kind of stuck with a huge import bill because we import a lot of our transport fuel. So it kind of solves, I would say, two issues at the same time. And then it has environmental co-benefits like reduced urban smog, urban pollution. Second, I would say is really we need to invest in public transport infrastructure. I'm from Karachi, and already I think we're seeing that with the rollout of the Karachi rapid bus transit project, people are already, again, because of increasing energy prices, people who live far away from the urban centers, increasingly they are using these facilities because, driving your car to and from work, it's become really expensive, again, given the increase in petrol costs, if people were to come separately. So I think these are two key policy points that the government really needs to address. And EVs, again, I think the problem of underutilized grid capacity, but eventually if you're greening the grid, right, if you're investing in renewable energy, so it will have an overall reduced carbon footprint as well. So again, addressing 3 points together. Secondly, I wanted to just address another sort of point, which is developing local renewable energy infrastructure, because otherwise you're just essentially replacing one imported source, whatever that might be, natural gas or, RFO or, whatever energy source we're currently importing with another imported source, especially if you're importing things like solar panels from other countries, until and unless Pakistan is able to indigenize the renewable energy industry, develop solar panels locally, develop the accessories locally. Similarly, for wind power infrastructure, all of this needs to be developed locally using local resources. So it will create employment, but also, address our foreign exchange issue. So until and unless that capacity is fully developed, Pakistan is not going to be able to meet its renewable energy targets. I think according to the alternative renewable energy policy, something like 30% by 2030 and 60% by 2060, something like that. So until and unless that kind of localized renewable energy infrastructure is developed, I think it's going to be very hard for us to meet our targets. Secondly, I was looking at the NDCs for Pakistan. These are the nationally determined contributions from each country as part of Pakistan's commitments under the UNFCCC to global climate targets. And within that, Pakistan has already estimated that the cost of Pakistan's energy transition is estimated to be around $100 billion US. So they've committed to kind of undertaking 35% of it by themselves, but the rest of it, around 65%, is expected to be financed by international either donors or international FDI, right? So I think that is really one area that the country needs to tap into, because this is already part of our global climate commitments, and COP28 is happening in November in Dubai this year, and I think this is a really great opportunity, especially for countries with which Pakistan already has good relations. So I mean, there's a huge, I think, market there for carbon credits as well. You're investing in Pakistan's sort of energy transition towards a more renewable, more green system, and then having other countries claim credits for that. So I think that could potentially work in Pakistan's favor in the long term. Secondly, from the imports perspective, right? So, I mean, we've talked a lot about the textile industry, but it is at the end of the day very, very energy intensive compared to a lot of other industries. So I think there is an urgent need for the government to focus on non-traditional export sectors. There are industries like pharmaceuticals, for example, or even IT-based services, so digital infrastructure. Pakistan's one big advantage, I think, is a huge population, which is educated, which is English speaking, and there are, especially after the COVID-19 pandemic, there are huge opportunities for remote work, especially in the IT sector. So having a good kind of digital infrastructure in place, minimizing things like power outages or internet outages, I think it's really important that we kind of minimize disruptions, because there are a lot of people in Pakistan who are actively kind of using social media, who are using products like LinkedIn and YouTube and all of these basically digital facilities to earn an income either through like content writing or even through IT-based services. So I think there's a huge need to really invest in IT exports from Pakistan. Of course, our neighboring countries have done that pretty well. And there's a huge potential in Pakistan as well to scale this up. It's, I mean, of course, requires some basic training, but because we have that sort of human capital, I think there is a huge potential there as well to take it in that direction. And then finally, one thing, again, Pakistan's huge potential is in the agricultural sector, right? So unfortunately, I mean, we've been working closely with a couple of export-oriented companies which export spice mixes to the EU and to the Middle East Gulf markets, right? But because our value chains are not as developed as some of the international markets, so it's very hard for local exporters to meet those international certifications and accreditations. So one thing that the government, especially Board of Investment and all, could do is to facilitate local farmers, local exporters to achieve those certifications, right? So minimizing spoilage, having kind of good refrigeration throughout your value chain for products, ensuring that your organic pesticides are being used, enhancing traceability. So what a lot of import-oriented countries look for is traceability. And I think that's something Pakistan currently lacks. So even though there's huge potential, they do need to be facilitated with achieving international accreditations. And this can be done either by having, accreditation facilities in-house, either through government or through, even the private sector, which can come in and provide these facilities to your local farmers, to your local exporters. So yeah, essentially, I think in a nutshell, these were my main points. But yeah, we can take it from there.
Sure. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ms. Maha. I think very relevantly the point about the electric vehicles is very much taken, because I think eventually we have to mechanism where we actually divert away from these imported fossil fuel sources. And yeah, again, thank you. It completely makes sense that if the renewable energy industry is to, I mean, achieve the targets actually trying to achieve in Pakistan, we need to ensure its localization as well. And I think it is also, again, thank you for pointing out those figures in the nationally determined contributions as well. I think the climate commitments are, especially with Pakistan made under the Paris Agreement, and to which this the finance flow is coming to Pakistan. That's again very relevant, because you need to showcase that yes, Pakistan has a low carbon economy, and you need to put the relevant infrastructure as well as all the key institutions in place, so that you can particularly attract the private sector investments. Because again, the money is for Pakistan. The money is not a problem. The money basically follows a reward. So you have to actually come up with the mechanisms that can actually mobilize all the money going towards these clean energy targets and clean energy options. Yeah. So thank you so much again for all the very key recommendations coming from your side, Ms. Maha, as well. So I think yeah, we're 3 minutes of the time as well. So I think as of now, do we have any other further recommendations or any other points from our esteemed panelists? So anything from your end? Yeah. Okay. So I think thank you so much. We have very elaborately covered all of the points. Thank you so much again for all the panelists and the audience for I mean, coming up with all the very key recommendations and the challenges, particularly around this sector. I think just to conclude and sum it up, we have very extensively with most of the panelists today have highlighted that there is a need to, again, have a transition towards the renewable energy resources, because definitely in the longer sense, they make a much better economic case. They provide a much better environment case that can actually make those fundings flow towards these climate-friendly initiatives, particularly coming from the international sides. Secondly, I think any decarbonization of the industrial sector, particularly, again, coming up with just export-oriented sectors, decarbonization is one of the very pertinent points, because the global pressure these export-oriented sectors, particularly the textile, is facing, unless that issue is addressed, the sector will actually, the pressure on exports is totally going to increase. So yeah, decarbonization is not just an environment case, but also the economic case for most of these countries. So I think many of the panelists have also highlighted the need to transition from a single buyer model towards a multiple buyer model under the competitive trading bilateral contracts market, CTBSA model, which was very well elaborated by both Ms. Afia as well as Hassan Saab. So I think along with the CTBCM, the power wheeling regulations, again, yes, exactly. I think Hassan Saab also mentioned that Pakistan has already did a pilot project for the CTBCM, and power wheeling regulations are also going to play a very critical role. So the power division, as well as all the relevant stakeholders, they need to, mobilize the challenges currently Pakistan is facing for this power wheeling regime. So I think Ms. Afia also very relevantly highlighted the cross-subsidization issues and how we need to have a more focus towards the towards having a focus towards the productive sectors, particularly the industries. Then I think Dr. Faisal also very decisively, very elaborately mentioned how the demand side efficiencies or the production efficiencies are actually going to play a very key role, because I think completely agree with the point that government is currently operating in a very limited fiscal space, and that needs to be addressed. So a lot of actions have to be taken by the private sector in themselves as well. And I think Ms. Maha also very efficiently mentioned what are the key sectors which can actually mobilize this transition away from these carbon intensive fossil fuel projects, particularly through the use of electric vehicle industry as well as other sectors. So I think that this is again all of some very good recommendations. So I think just to give away beyond moving this, will shortly we get back to all the panelists as well as all the participants we have today with the key recommendations, and on the basis of this we'll be drafting the policy brief that would be I think the initial recommendations would be shared with you in a week's time, along with, I think some of them you mentioned in the questions. We will definitely be forwarding you the recording of this session. And I think we'll be coming along with all the key recommendations that would be eventually forwarded to the relevant stakeholders. So I think with this, I thank you again to everyone who's joined us, who's been very attentively. This has been again very technical and very wonderful session. So yeah, so again, thank you so much, Maha. Thank you so much, Faisal, Jamil, Dr. Faisal, Maheen, and everyone, including the team from STPS. Thank you so much again. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth, for conducting so nicely in the whole
Thank
session.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Maha. Thank you so much, everyone. Good Hafiz.